Hello guys, welcome to this presentation of our Arturia 3 new modulation effects. I'm Martin, I'm product manager here at Arturia, and tonight I'm gonna do a quick overview of these new 3 plugins that we just released 2 weeks ago. These are modulation effects, so maybe just let me take 1 minute to explain you why we did this ones, and specifically these 3 models. So modulation effects such as chorus, flanger, phaser, you get them in all DAW actually, and there's many versions of them. But the fact is that most of them are digital phaser and flanger and choruses. And there's a big difference with the sound you can obtain with vintage or hardware pedals, for example, than with the digital software version. So that's why we made that, because there's not that many recreation on the market today. Mostly you will find digital one, not a reproduction. Their sound is unique. So you get this 70s, 80s vibe. I'm going to show you each of them has their own character. And that's also something that inside us to work on this one, it was really important to convey that sound, that groove that you have on the hardware version. Also, I mean, the first thing is the one I'm going to present you and the one we chose, they just sound awesome. You know, if people are still using them in the studio, that's for a good reason. It's because there's some of the best out there. So the one we did this year is the Chorus Dimension D, classic chorus from the 70s, the Phaser Bitron, which is a hugely popular guitar pedal phasing unit, and the Flanger BL20, which is actually really rare. Probably most of you guys don't know it. I'm gonna show it to you. It's derived from a UK hardware unit from the 70s as well. Let's start. What I'll do is I go through 3 of them, and at the end we'll work on a track which include the 3 of them. First of all, also make sure maybe you got your headphones on if you can, because as it's modulation effect, we're using a lot of the stereo field, so it's probably better to listen to that presentation with the headphones or a set of speakers. And also, this is an interactive presentation, so feel free, do not hesitate 1 second to put comments or questions beside the video stream, and at the end of the presentation, we'll try to answer most of them. Okay? All right, so let's go now, and I'll start with the Chorus Dimension D. Here it is. So Chorus Dimension D is probably one of the most famous chorus units ever made. There's 2 main reasons for that. First of all, it has a unique sound, very smooth, lush, you know, something that you can take whatever sources, insert the Dimension D on it, and it will sound good. And the second reason, I think, is also because it's so simple to use. It's basically 4 buttons. And that's the great thing about the original designer of this hardware unit, is that they worked on presets. And they integrated this preset in the unit, so you don't have to fiddle with too many parameters. Just select which preset works best for your source, and that's it. For us, when we started working on this unit, there were also 2 key things. The first was to replicate as best as we could the original hardware electronics. And I'm going to explain a little bit, maybe give you a little bit insight on this, because that's really important. In fact, chorus is some, you know, simple effect. As I said earlier, you get them everywhere. But having them, this type of effect with this analog electronic from the 70s, at the time it was quite complicated to do that good sounding chorus with what was available at the time, and that's what provides this unique sound. So we recreate the original one, we kept the mode, so each of the buttons here are presets. So yeah, 1, 2, 3 are different settings of rate and depth, which set your chorus. And the button 4 is actually here to change the balance, because yeah, I didn't mention that, but as it is preset, when you press one button, you set the depth, the rate, but you also set the wet-dry balance. So the button 4 here is to increase the wet part of the signal in that balance. So we kept that, and when we started developing this unit, actually we saw a lot of video, comments and Gearslut, etc., about all the possibilities, like the combination of this button. And it's true that you can combine some of the button on the original hardware unit. So we kind of tested all of them, and we came out with both measurements, listening test, and also analysis of the circuitry that there are actually 6 combinations possible of this 4 button here. So you can have 1, 2, 3, and add the 4 button to each of them. On the original hardware unit, for those who know it, you can have button 4 on its own, but in fact the result is the same as if you were pressing 3 and 4. I'm gonna grab directly a little track here just to make a first listen. At the time, and that's my belief at least, at the time when stereo was growing in the 70s, this unit, which was created in 1979, the primary goal was to take a mono track and you make it stereo. So you can give a fantastic sense of stereo with this unit, and just with mostly any type of mono track. So here I've got a little track here with some pads from our latest V collections in the OBXA. Let's listen to it first. Mostly a funky sound from that era, I would say. So you can see this type of sense, mostly mono, not that wide. And here, if I just select the chorus dimension D, insert on it, let's go for it, that's the one. Sorry, yep. That's it. I was opening the wrong version of the plugin. Let's listen back. This is the mono version. Right, the original OBXA sound. Now with dimension D inserted on it. All right. So if I switch to the mode, you'll see the different variation in depth and rate. This one is slower version. And if I'm adding button 4 here, I'm increasing the wet signal. Again, I mean, the fantastic thing about the dimension D is this create this whole stereo space without altering the sound. And maybe it's just it's time to talk a little bit about what's inside the box. So the original dimension D is based on a BBD, so it's a bucket brigade delay. It's actually a kind of it's an analog delay based on capacitor. It's like if you were sampling in the analog domain the sound and replaying it at a different pitch at different speed. And so you got the LFO modulating this delay, and that's create the chorus effect. Now, the BBD chip from that era didn't have and still don't have very good audio qualities, like the bandwidth is reduced, the dynamic, it saturates quite easily. So the engineers at the time, they put the BBD chip in the middle of a circuit with some pre-processing and post-processing. And when we start working on the unit, like at the beginning of the year, we soon realized that this environment was key to the sound of the original. You could take the BBD only, and that's what we remember, for this type of unit, and the sound was not that good. So they included some filters, both pre and post the actual delay chip, but also a compressor pre the BBD chip, so they will reduce the dynamic of your sound entering it. But at the output of the delay chip, they would add this expander, which will try to bring back the original dynamic, and also another set of filters. So all these filters plus dynamics plus the BBD chips that's what creates this sound. And because it's all in the analog domain, it kind of brings this really nice feel. It will cut a little bit the low end, the high end, and it took us ages to really model that properly. And that's key to the sound of this recreation. Now, really simple unit, but as you know, probably with all our recreation, be it instrument or effects, we try to add additional feature set. Wouldn't be, you know, we try and we do our best to add only stuff that is relevant to the original. So we try to expand the original use, or, you know, benefit from the fact that we're in the digital domain, for example, so we can be more flexible. Also, we add additional feature just to emphasize some of the key characteristics of the original unit. And in this case, for example, on Dimension D, we added this little rack here, which really all about that. So we added some different oscillator shapes. So if I go back to my little track here, and let's listen to it. Right, this is the original. So the default one is the triangle, and that was the original LFO shape, but we added different variations. So sine, so it's a bit more mellow. The ramp, it's a bit more. And the two last are quite interesting. It's a sample and hold and sample and glide. So basically it's a random selection of sampling of the sound, which pilot the LFO. So you'll see it gives a little bit uncertainty to the modulation. It's a bit more wobbly in a way, but it can work great on some sources. Have a listen. Right? And the sample and glide is a bit filtered version of it. So it's more mellow. Again, this is to bring more flexibility to the original unit, which was using only triangle. We added width and dry wet as well, because as I told you, each preset has its own dry-wet balance, but as a plugin, if you're using it as a send mode, like on an auxiliary bus, for example, it's cool to be able just to only keep the wet or to adjust the balance as well. Width is the same. You get this nice stereo feel, but it's also cool to, you know, play around with it. The important thing to me here, it's and maybe the most subtle and not that easy to perceive at first, you know, first hearing, but it's dynamic color. So, you know, we spend so much time on the analog parts of and the circuitry around the BBD, so the pre-emphasis and post processing after the BBD chip, which create the delay and the chorus effect. That we realized that by altering some of the settings of, for example, the compressor and the expander after the BBD, we will get different sound. And so that's what we got here with dynamic color. It's different time settings for both the compressor and the expander. So if you go default, that's the original settings as it is on the original. But smooth, it's probably more mellow, so you won't get that much analog feel to it, a bit less, but more transparent, I would say. And LFSAT 1 and 2 are with shorter time constant for the compressor and the expander, and this is resulting in a more a bit more saturation, you know, a bit more harsh, and it's really interesting. It's actually most audible on the bass sound in the low frequency, where the short time constant will kind of, you know, shape the sound a bit more dramatically. Mostly, you know, create saturation low, erasing a bit more of the high end and creating this medium distortion a bit. Again, this is really subtle. I invite you to play around with this. I even invite you to try on several tracks to stack some of Dimension D and put just dynamic color to a certain set and to see how it affects your sound. One thing I didn't mention while talking about this dynamic color is what we did on the mode 0 here. So on the original unit here, mode 0 is a bypass. But we already have the power button for the bypass, and because all this analog circuitry seemed so interesting for us and sonically interesting, we thought maybe we could have a mode where we only benefit from the analog circuitry without having the chorus effect. So that's what it's about mode 0. So the sound won't go into the delay lines, but it will go through all the filters, compressor, expander, filters again, in all the analog circuits. So that's pretty cool. You can really, with this mode, like subtly color your sound with all this analog magic. And if you try to listen on different sources the effect of dynamic color, I invite you to try in mode 0, or maybe put the also dimension mode at full whack, like mode 3 plus 4, to really hear what it brings to the track. I'm going to try here on this little track. I've got a bass sound here where I've got my dimension D here, probably push it more with mode 3 and 4. And I'm going to switch from smooth to LFSAT, and hopefully we'll hear a difference. Again, this is really subtle. It needs careful listening, in your studio. But again, it's the sum of these small details that makes, your track rich and make this recreation, I think, sounding good. Let's try here. Where's my bass? It's here. Right, so this is with smooth. I'm going to start with smooth and jump directly to LFSAT2 so we can hear the biggest variation and hear the difference more easily. So you see it's slightly more grit to the sound, so depending on the track it will really help. So this is something which is key to this recreation, maybe compared to other choruses, is this analog part that makes sense to recreate the vibe from the 70s, from the 80s, all this time that this unit was used in almost thousands of studios. But it's also making sense on modern production today, I think, just to round things a little bit. It helps help with the mix also. Let's listen to this street track here together with the chorus dimension D applied on both the synth lead and the bass. Now I'm going to remove it. String 4, it's better. Right? The difference is really notable. Dimension D is only on bass and the synths. So that's it for the chorus dimension D. Not much more to say. I think that's fine. Though it's really unique device to create a stereo field from a mono track. It has this mellow sound, this very analog vintage feel from the 70s and 80s, and dig into the dynamic color subtleties and think it's something interesting. Next one on the list, and that we are also releasing, is the let's do the flanger. So Flanger Bell BL20. This is probably among the three we're releasing this year the less known. In fact, when we started the project, I was not aware of the existence of this unit, and it's why talking to a lot of our engineers, sound engineer producers, friends from Arturia, that you know, helping us find good sound and good ideas. And one of them, Joe Barresi, you probably know, he came with that model and say, man, you really need to listen to that one. That's my go-to flanger. So I was a bit, you know, oh, hey, we should check it out. So we managed to find one in Europe. It's pretty difficult to get hold of the real thing. And yeah, I wasn't disappointed at all. This is really a special unit, special in a way that it's really unpredictable. You must be careful with the feedback on this. It can get really crazy. And it's special also, I think, because of its ability to combine 3 different sources of modulation. So flanger is a bit an effect like you could really, it's close to a chorus, but with shorter delay time. And this results in different, you know, sonic experience. It's still, this particular unit is still relying on BBD, so on bucket brigade delay. It's not the same model. It's another brand. This is ACD. The one in the dimension D is a MN for the one who knows. So the sound is a bit different, but the principles are roughly the same. In terms of electronic, on the BBD part, it's the same. The big difference here is about the modulation sources and how you could combine that on the original unit. So if you see it here, we got dry-wet mix, that's easy. Region, which is the feedback. So that's also a difference with the chorus, that you usually on a flanger we have the feedback and it completely alters the tone of the sound. And we got the control here. So all this part is about modulation sources. And we can combine some up to 3 modulation sources. We got a manual. So this is basically a knob setting a delay value. So you can automate it, or you can fix it, or just, you know, modulate by hand on the original unit. It was that way. We've got envelope follower. So it will take the input signal or sidechain signal, detect the envelope, and this signal, envelope signal, will trigger the flanging effect. And you can the auto, which is basically internal LFO with rate, depth. So this is more classical. So really, this addition of envelope follower plus manual instead of just the internal LFO, what makes the unit special. Something really cool here, we're going to listen to it just in one moment, is the reverse sweep. So you actually, on stereo signal, you will reverse the LFO of the right channel. So if left is going up, right is going down, instead of moving together, they will move in an inverse way. Let's have a quick listen of this. I'm just going to keep it on auto here to get the most common sound on this one. This is the original sound. Right. So you can see modulation going on. Here you can visualize the rate of the signal, and depending on the depths, you know, the amplitude of the modulation will be more important. Here I got this reverse sweep. Just listen the effect of that, because this is super interesting. You can see with the flanger right now, the stereo field is like, wow, we go from one mono source to something really into the stereo realm, you know, from left to right. And this is mostly because of this. Just listen. Right. As you can see, if you get on headphones on, and here you can, I think, hope you can hear it. Just the basic settings like this is that you really get this BBD effect. So it's rounding the sound a little bit, it's getting a bit more medium, a bit saturation also added in the low end. That's part of the, you know, this analog vibe. So we also added on this one quite a lot of additional features, so you can click here and get them here. And first of one is actually in use right now as a high pass filter. So it's true that with modulation, sometimes you, and quite often actually, you don't want to modulate the low end of your signal because it's gonna get messy if you get part of your bass sound which is in your track. Starting into moving left, right like this is something maybe you don't want. So we add this high pass, which is I think really useful for this type of effect. Right here on the other side, we got the auto shape. So the original one again was a triangle. We propose some additional shapes. So if you want to change the, you know, we can go through actually some of them here. Right. And that's also something I wanted to mention, is that make these plugins, I think, different from most of the modulation plugin available elsewhere, is that when you're in the analog domain with this analog circuitry, when you decide to design a sine wave or square wave generator, you know, square LFO, well, in reality, you never get a proper square, you never get a proper triangle. It's always rounded up a little bit because you can't get this perfect shape. This is in the digital realm, you can, but with capacitors and all that, it's pretty difficult. So I think this little imperfection also add to the character of this type of effect, and we took also a lot of care trying to, you know, not to say, oh, it's a triangle, let's implement a digital triangle LFO, but to really respect the imperfection of what the analog circuitry was creating, for example, on the generating a triangle or a square LFO signal. One thing here also, stereo offset, is like we delay the right channel of the LFO signal, which are gonna slowly kind of offset the right LFO channel from the left. And I'm gonna play around with it. You're gonna hear also what it brings. It's super cool for just shaping your landscape in a way. You know, how wide I want my image to be. I'm starting right now from a mono signal. Well, the stereo offset really helps you to shape that. And thanks to, this was a proposal from Kevin, one of our DSP guru here, who tried that out. It wasn't something, you know, we was planning to do, but in fact it's actually really interesting. Let's have a listen quickly on that. Well, let's keep the same signal. So, I'm gonna remove that for better understanding. Yeah, just for making it easier to hear, I'm gonna remove the reverse totally and just play with the stereo offset here. So you can hear, yeah, the way it you know, it's taking the space or not. That's also a cool feature. And last but not least is, you know, we had already 3 sources of modulation, and say, why not adding a 4th one? What triggers that is that for the manual on the original unit, you will actually turn the knob live just to create your modulation directly, you know, manually. And that's not that easy on the plugin. So a function generator, which is basically the same function generator you can find in Pigments, is applied. So you can decide to apply your function generator to the manual, to add on to the manual position. So you get your manual position, and on top of that, you add the function generator. So it's really easy. You know, you can draw your shape. We got a lot of different variation. You can sync it to your host tempo as well. And this add a little bit of also, you know, add more depth to the product in a way. Let's try now. I'm not adding yet this. I'm just going to add the manual position. So you see how it's... What I just want to do is create a kind of space. You know, I'm not right now with this example, I'm not really going into the full whack flangey, you know, moving all around. I'm just trying to create a space, and adding a little bit of movement in that space is something quite interesting. So if I'm adding this, so I'm now is the let's listen this exact same feature set. I think it's Tram Loop here. Yeah. That's something actually I wasn't using that much before working on this project. This type of modulation for me is about guitar, synths, pads. But in fact, on drum loops and rhythmic element, it's really interesting because you can create a bit of a mess around. I'll show you on another one, but you can also, for me, take like place as a reverb would take, but with the advantage that you can control the modulation. It's not some, you know, tail you're adding to the signal. It's something that will move on, especially with the function generator or the envelope follower. So it's quite interesting. And for me, it was, you know, something I rediscovered working on this project. So like on this drum loop, so because I put the high pass fairly high, the modulation will only affect the hi-hat or the snare a little bit, and it's subtle, but that creates a space with a certain movement in it, and I think that's a case where this unit is pretty useful. So I retain most of the low end and not modulating the kick drum, but I can create that space and movement around the you know, high frequency part of the loop. Let's listen on this. Right. Sound from the brute range. Applying this, a bit of everything actually. Again, creating some very subtle movements, and I think that works also well on most synths. That's the original one. So you can hear this is only with the internal LFO. This is what you mostly get with most of the other flanger available. You know, as far as I know, when you get flanger with internal LFO, that's what you get. Having this combination as modulation is really making things much richer. You know, more, I think, more interesting in a way, and it don't need necessarily to be over the top as you often tend, or at least I often tend to do with flanger, but it's interesting to create subtle movements. And so here I'm adding the manual, which is also combined with the function generator. You can see. little bit of envelope follower. So yeah, already an interesting sound from Brute, but it benefits also with this type of processing. And last one I wanted to show you, it's a voice track. Again, trying to create some space around. I actually realized that I'm not giving that many examples over the top. Maybe I should next time. But here also I create a little space around voice, and could be also interesting in some case. Let's listen to it without anything here.
Trying to let go, but opposites attract.
Dry voice.
Energy flows, so why do we grow apart? Trying to let go, but opposites attract. Energy flows, so why do we grow apart?
Really little movements, but you get this, you know, I find a great space around the voice, really intimate. It's not a reverb, so you don't get, you know, this tail or this roomy effect that you can have with reverb on that type of objective, you know, trying to get that kind of result. So again, that's something, and the BBD filtering and the analog circuitry adding to the voice also this little
trying to let go, but
edge.
Opposites attract.
So maybe I should put a little bit less, but
so why do we grow apart?
Right. That's it. One last thing is about the zero crossing mode here. Maybe I should go back to one of the previous sample we had. Maybe we can try this one if we didn't listen to it. Yeah. Right. So zero crossing mode was what you will actually do with a tape machine. So in the days where this unit wasn't even conceived, you were using two tape machines and you were slowing down one tape machine, mixing it up with the original version, and you get this flanging effect using tapes. And if you were dealing using the different, it's going to be complicated to explain exactly how they were doing it, but put it simply, they would get this effect where when the two signals were crossing in opposite phase opposition completely, you get a full cancellation of the sound, which provide a deeper flanging effect. So zero crossing mode is something we added here. So we kind of delaying a little bit the dry sound, so and reversing the phase of the wet sound. So when they are crossing together, actually they are out of phase and we have a total cancellation. This is really interesting if you want to get this, you know, almost helicopter-like effect, or, you know, cancelling the track completely, disappearing. It provides, I think, a more deep flange effect, and also it changed the tone a little bit because you go through zero. So let's see if this one is good for that prospect. Yeah. Without it. Can hear, because here I've got a mixture of different modulation sources. It's a bit messy, but you can hear at some point it kind of cancel itself. So that's something we added here, and you can play around to get back to this classic zero crossing flanging sound. Right, I think I covered most of the flanger. Anyway, remember, if you have any question, you know, leave it in the comments. I'll try to answer afterwards. Last one is the phaser. So this big chunky unit, I think I've got one here at the back, probably one of the biggest guitar pedal ever made. It's really interesting. This one is the oldest from the three. It was created in 1974. This time we're not talking about BBD and this technology. It's something completely different. It's a very interesting unit in terms of a history of the sound effect. It was the first phaser with feedback. That's the first point, and you will get much more deeper sound, and this, I'll show you in a minute, this tone that playing with feedback, you can literally change the sound of your phasing. And the other characteristic is it uses a special component which named a Vactrol. So prior to that, they were using FET or more common electronic components. Vactrol is an optocoupler. So you get this in a small encasing. You get this little light which is emitted with the current when you apply current to it. And in front of it, you get this receiver, light receiver. And this Vactrol component is the interface between your modulation source and the phasing itself, the phasing unit itself. And that brings it has a huge impact on the sound because Vactrol has a huge dynamic range, much more than what you will get with regular electronic. The downside, I would say, is that, it's a bit slower. So if you apply very fast modulation on at the input of the Vactrol, it will kind of, not react as with high fidelity, I would say. And also because from one Vactrol component to another, you had quite a lot of dispersion. That's why the unit we modeled, maybe if you got a real phaser, the equivalent, the hardware equivalent yourself, you may find a little bit of variation. That's because each Vactrol had a lot of disparities. And when we started developing this, we were, okay, well, let's do it. Okay, it's going to be easy. It's actually only on this Vactrol component, it took us 2 months. So Geoffrey, the guy at DSP team who did it, it's been really tough. Not a lot of documentation. It's an enclosed component, so getting all this non-linearity, its behavior was really difficult. And that's also key to this plugin, is that we really took a large amount of time to recreate that key component. Okay, so now back to the plugin. We reused the original layout, which is 2 phasing units, 2 LFO generator, and 1 pedal, which can act also as a modulation source. The big difference is that because we are in a plugin, we transformed the phaser unit from being mono on the hardware unit to being stereo if we want to. And all this mono stereo thing is set using the routing here, where you can select how do you want both phaser to be commuted. So that's the thing we added. Also, one key thing is that each phaser can have a blend of the 2 generators. So that's why you have depths 1, 2 for each of them, is that you can set 2 generator rates or shapes and combine them in the single phasing unit. You got feedback, so that was also one of the key features in the original unit. And you can also decide if you want one of the phaser unit being controlled by the pedal. I get back to the pedal because we added some additional feature with it. But you can choose here if you want each phaser to be controlled by the generators, the pedal, or the sum of both. So you can also, again, same as the Flanger, get this really complex movements on your sound, which are cool. Let's have a first listen on this track here. That's what I like with, you know, modulations, is the way it's just, you know, give a completely different perspective in terms of stereo field. And it's not boring. It's like having movement in it, and the phaser for that is a great asset, a great tool. We can just maybe so what I have here is basically a very slow modulation. Actually, let me show you. Yeah, that's the one I'm playing. Yes. So one fast generator here, one slower. So I'm just bypass phaser B, so we're only listening to phaser E right now. Right? So the way we have the routing here is in parallel. So if I'm adding phaser B, it's taking also the input and summing it at the output. So if we're listening to phaser B, right, completely different rate. I'm controlling the amount here and adding both. Right, so I'm having this complex modulation by, you know, summing the phaser. I can sum the generator together. Here is an interesting button. Let's listen to it. Maybe just this one. Again, it's the same on the flanger. We did a bit of the same. You can, and this was part of the original unit, you can reverse the LFO coming to the phaser B compared to what's coming to phaser A. So you get these two different movements, which can be super cool. Let's try another sample here. Original sound. So this time what I'm having is a two-phaser in series. So the output of phaser A is going into phaser B. I just uncover here our advanced panel for this unit. So what we added is the ability to change the number of poles. So number of pole is the number of notch in the phasing effect. So if you only have two, I would say the phasing is simpler, or adding more poles getting the sound richer in a way, because you're getting more notch. So when you're modulating it against the dry signal, it's provided different type of effect. So you will be able to play around with this. Each phaser has its dry wet mix, and that's really useful because you can then decide, you know, how much in that series settings, you can decide how much of the phaser A I want to listen at the output, you know. You can, you know, work on your balance here. We added a high pass, so same as the flanger. It can be really useful just to filter out the low frequency if needed. And that's about it. So here I've got phaser B with 10 poles, this one with 6. 6 was the original settings for the hardware unit, but so we add this one. This. So again, very easily, cool sound, quite rich, different type of movement in there. That's pretty cool. I want to show you this to end up on the phaser. Is for the pedal, you can manually, and that's still the case, you can manually activate the pedal here to, you know, yourself be the LFO. So you can control either the rate of the phasing, But you can also control the value of the rate for this one. So when you select pedal here, that's what's happening here. But what we added, and this was basically possible with the original unit, what we added is an envelope follower which can take the input signal and take a sidechain signal. And again, it's providing signal-dependent modulation signal, and you can decide to add it to one or two phases. So let's listen for a moment. I'm only modulating and using phaser A, only using the generator here on this synth sound. Let's listen to it. It's guitar. Cool track, guitar track with some delays, processing with the phaser now. So right now, it's the generator who's controlling the phaser. I'm gonna sweep to the pedal and you're gonna check out different sounds. Generator, pedal. And now I'm gonna sum that both of them here. So I got a mixture of the LFO and the pedal. Please note that the LFO, the rate is controlled also by the envelope follower in this case. So you see, with even not using second phaser, we can get pretty cool result. I really like the envelope follower because it's kind of adding life. Generator can be a bit on the beat or quite constant. The envelope follower, you can set it up. You got a compressor also to reduce the dynamic of the the envelope, and you can really add life to your LFO. That's something super cool. One little detail I didn't mention here also is adding these two little switch here where you can revert the LFO contribution for phaser A in that case, and here for phaser B. What it means that, for example, here if I select Gen here, Gen 1 is controlling my phasing, is modulating my phaser, and with this button I can invert, because I'm in stereo, I can invert channel right compared to channel left. Let's listen to it. So, right. Again, little subtle thing that instead of both sides moving same way, it's kind of inverted, and it's adding a richness also to the modulation. Right, I think I've covered most of the three of them. What I would like just to conclude is maybe show you one of our tracks that one of our in-house sound designer, Jibe, composed for using mostly our phasing, flanger, and chorus. And just to pick it up, I'm going to show you in situation some of the track. Right, here let's focus on the synths we have here. from Pigments. Super cool sound. Let's listen to it as it came out from Pigments. So what we wanted to do here is really add some mellowness, some movement. Phasers seem really suited for that. Let's listen what it does. I'll show you that. So this time we're using it in dual mono. So phaser A for channel left, phaser B for channel right. Mostly with tempo rates which are synced to the track, to the tempo of the host. The Gen 1 is piloting or modulating phaser A, Gen 2 modulating phaser B. Quite a lot of feedback, reverse on the B here, and standard LFO shape. Like listen, with and without. So here, it's fairly simple. I found it beautiful. It's just about, this analog feel. It's not harsh. It's quite gentle. It's mellow. It's gooey in a way, and that's an example of what you can do with a phaser bitrun. Let's listen again in the track here. Right here, I'm having a CMI from the V collection track. Okay. Cool sound as well. Cool pad. Let's hear the effect of the Dimension D. And again, this is an example to show you that this type of modulation with the V collection or pigments, it's killer, really. We were surprised ourselves just to have them alongside the V collection. For those who are using them, this is going to be a great addition. So let's listen this CMI track with and without the dimension mode. It's fairly simple settings, all basic. I put a little bit of LSAT to give a little bit grit, but otherwise it's in mode 3+4 to get a deeper effect, but that's it. So without. With. It's again simple effect, simple purpose, but it does it beautifully. And it's, yeah, I don't know what to say of this. The Dimension D is, a touch of analog feel to a very little details, and the sum of the little details makes something, pretty nice. At the top on the second part, what I added just for the fun of it is on the top of that. So on top of the CMI plus the Dimension D, I added a bit of a flanger on it just to give this old tape effect in the second part of the track. So let's listen. Again, this time it's a bit over the top, but it was fun. So without. This is derived from one of the factory preset, old keyset player. Again, by combining the different modulation sources here, we get this dodgy feel, broken tape feel here. Yeah, so you can see manual is triggered by the function generator. We have quite high speed auto, but not that much. And the envelope follower also give a bit of movement. Let's listen back a second time. Okay. Two little things here just to conclude. Little theme here from an acoustic instrument from a Spitfire audio. Just added a bit of a, again, it's quite mono. I wanted the thing to occupy more space here, so the flanger for that was super cool. Right, little delay from the FX collection. Right, and with the effect. Just giving more width. A little bit of movement, so inside the track. So without. That's it. That's again the ability to create some space around your track, which is, you know, not muddy, interesting. Moving on. And I think that's about it. So thank you for, you know, attending this. I hope I wasn't too long. We're gonna try to answer your question. You know, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, it's chorus dimension D, flanger, Bitron, phaser Bitron, sorry, flanger BL20. These are out now. You should hurry up if you don't have them already, because the promotion period, I think, is ending in a few days. We're entering the last days of the promotion, so you should, you know, check them out now. You got cool demo on our website, you know, sound example. Check out also the tutorial if you want to get more details on the function I didn't cover. And that's it. So let's check the question right now. Should you have two channels when mixing bass with it? Well, I don't know. Not really rules. In that case, what you could do is just sum up at the input, pressing the mono button here at the input, so you can get at least your both left and right of your source processed in the same way. But yeah, for me, there's not many, you know, rule for that. How in depth can you get with a drawing tool? Well, let me show you on the flanger here. Right. You can really, it has all pigments capability, so you can draw it like that. Get back to init, for example. You get super cool presets and like this type of crazy stuff. Rhythmic, this is super cool. Actually, let me show you something here. We didn't listen to it. This is on the track we just listened. Right, that's the loop. What I wanted to achieve here was just adding a little bit of movement on the snare, and also in the second part here, when we got the hi-hat coming in, also I was adding some movement. So, and here we go. You can see, right, what the function generator is adding is movement on top of the, you know, internal LFO. So yeah, you can go very far. You can, like, you know, easy. Again, it has, we kept all the improvement and refinement we had in pigment, like the regen here to randomize some forms. You know, let's listen to some. Let's edit. Let's listen to it. That's the original track. So because I cut most of the low end here, it's not interfering too much with the kick. And you know, then you can go accelerate here. Yeah, I think you can go pretty in depth. There's an option in the plugin to select the envelope frequency. I haven't had the best result with it so far, so it's the best way to get the right frequency choice for bass. Yeah, because you don't really select a frequency on the phaser. You will select the number of pulls, so that's the number of notch you will get, and then you will select. Let me open it here. So it's true on this one, you don't set a proper frequency. You're going to set the number of notch and then how they will interact. Maybe some other phaser allow you to do that, but that's not exactly how it works on the Bitron. Yeah, I don't have much more. I think you should, in a way, try playing around with the rates. All the different, what the pedal can bring in, and see if you can get better result. But it's true, we don't have, and this original model didn't have that capability either. So we kept the, the philosophy of the original one. Could you please lower the phaser rate to show us a more subtle phaser sound? I can try, sure. Let me, maybe on this one, if we go. Good way also to be more subtle is to reduce the number of pull and feedback as well. Mix also. Hope that answers the question. Not about the 3 mod. Do you advise the FET for drums especially? Ha! Oh, you mean the FET 76? Yeah, compressor. I advise it for everything. The original unit, I think, if I'm not wrong, were used on vocals, on Michael Jackson vocals. You can use on vocals, you can use them on drums. It's great on acoustic guitar. It's a very interesting compressor because you can be very subtle and just get the needle ticking just to remove the very high, very fast transients. Or you can go over the top, get the all mode button in and smash it, and then with the dry wet we integrate, you can really, bring it and change more of the depth of your sound, more like a sound shaper in a way, or an EQ. So yeah, FET on the drum is fantastic. I recommend it. I also recommend the DBX, the 165 we did, the VCA 165. On drums, it's a killer. I love it also. It can be really, there's a limiter section on it which can, put back to life any loop. So yeah, both are super cool for that. Right, so I think we covered all questions. In any case, if you have other questions coming in the next days, next hours, feel free to drop a message on our social network, or can also send an email at support@arturia.com. They will transmit it to me, so I'll happily answer what I can. Right, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I wish you a good evening, and see you soon. Bye-bye.